supporting the offensive of tanks. The attacking aircraft of our division conducted intense combat work, coordinating the actions of the units. I was at the command post. Our comrade Colonel May came to me, duty telephonist, on the wire Major Ishchenko. I went to the machine, reported the chief of intelligence of the compound. At the station, Obal accumulated several enemy echelons. On the platforms, artillery, ammunition and fuel tanks. In addition, dozens of cars are scattered all over the tracks of the railroad junction. Probably, the enemy is pulling up artillery to launch a counterattack on the right flank of our troops, I thought. It is necessary to take urgent measures. Having assessed the situation, immediately ordered the commander of the 826th Air Regiment, hero of the Soviet Union, Lieutenant Colonel Vigi Demsotov, Belotov by forces of one unit to strike an assault on the concentration of enemy military echelons. Captain Popov's squadron flew out on the mission. One of the wingmen was a young communist Vladimir Gulyayev. This sociable young man, tall with a pleasant face, fellow soldiers loved for his courage in battle. By the way, in the first days of the war, went to defend the motherland, and his father, Leonid Mikhailovich Gulyayev, a candidate of historical sciences, an old party member. Volodya's mother, Maria Alexeyevna, a communist, was also in the army. At the station Obal was a lot of anti-aircraft artillery, and the attack aircraft could not attack the target from the get-go. Then Popov ordered 4 crews led by Captain V. Sukachev to divert enemy fire on themselves, and himself with Gulyayev decided to break through to the station. The maneuver was successful. While the enemy anti-aircraft gunners fired on the 4 Ilov appeared from the west, the commander and his partner at low altitude approached the station from the eastern direction. The leader put the attack aircraft into a dive and dropped bombs. A huge flame went up below. The explosion was so strong that Popov's machine was thrown aside. Losing control, it crashed into a railroad train. Gulyayev, flying a little higher than the leader, also dropped a bomb load. Clouds of black smoke enveloped the station. Fuel tanks were burning, shells were bursting. On the spare tracks stood a few more cars. Vladimir, ignoring the hurricane fire of anti-aircraft guns, directed his attack aircraft at them. From the dive he hit with rockets, then made several more runs, shooting from the cannons of fleeing Germans. To Popov. The squadron's raid was a success. All the tracks and buildings adjacent to the station were destroyed. The fire didn't subside for more than 2 days. The enemy's plan was thwarted. The counterattack failed. Soon we received an order to relocate 2 regiments of the division to the airfield of Bishenkovichi, which had just been liberated by our troops. Having landed first, I learned from the commander of the border guards that large groups of Germans were heading to this site from the surrounding forests. We had to urgently organize a circular defense. Having arranged airplanes around the perimeter of the airfield, we raised their tails for the convenience of firing. Pilots and airgunners prepared to fire. As soon as the Nazis approached the airfield boundaries, there were powerful machine gun salvos. Having swept away from the site, the enemy rushed westward. To further demoralize the retreating fighters, I ordered 3 crews to take off and pursue them relentlessly. In the morning, we learned that scattered groups of Hitlerites were trying to unite and break through to their troops. I ordered the commander of the 683rd Air Regiment to preempt the enemy's plans. Stormtroopers caught up with the invaders and dropped a deadly load on them. Rapid actions of the 1st Tank Corps, which was supported by our division, developed successfully. However, the pursuit of the enemy was hampered by the fact that there were sections of roads destroyed by special vehicles. While they were restored, the fascists under the cover of night managed to break away from our troops. In some cases, the situation was complicated and unclear. That's why the front commander, Army General Idatek Bagramian, ordered to urgently obtain accurate information about the enemy, as well as about our mobile units operating in its operational depth. This task was entrusted to Captains Denisov and Andreev, Senior Lieutenant Dyakov and Junior Lieutenant Fyatistov. Going at an altitude of 30-40 meters, the pilots carefully examined the terrain. Clearly visible were roads and tracks of tanks, leading to the area of concentration of the main forces of the corps of General Butkov. Captain Denisov threw out a pennant with a coded note on the location of our troop. Having completed the task, the attack aircraft returned to their airfield. Data air reconnaissance I immediately reported to the front headquarters. Communication between the units operating in this area was restored. The same group of pilots successfully completed another task, determined the line of contact between our infantry and the enemy for 80 kilometers. Denisov and his comrades had to fly on attack, with a deviation from left to right. As soon as the airplanes approached the enemy positions, they were fired on by machine guns and cannons. Scouts, skillfully maneuvering, mapped the situation. In the conditions of wooded and swampy terrain, aviators often had to search for the enemy and keep him under constant observation. Only experienced crews could do it. Communists I, Fedorishev, Verskaliv, Suspicious headed by Captain G. Denisov went on reconnaissance most often. One day, by barely distinguishable signs, they found the Hitlerites lurking. To determine their numbers and firepower, the stormtroopers, at the risk of their lives, for 2 hours combed the suspicious area of the forest meter by meter. Unable to withstand, the Nazis returned fire and thus demasked themselves. In one of the approaches, the leading plane was damaged and began to lose speed. Now it was necessary to deliver valuable intelligence to the headquarters as soon as possible. Choosing the shortest route, the attack aircraft took the curve to their airfield. While at the command post, I heard on the radio voice Denisov, "I'm the last to land." The squadron commander made the right decision. O did not want his machine, hit in battle, prevented the landing of other ill. The impression was that the plane was about to fall apart, not reaching the T. Swaying from wing to wing, it was approaching the ground. At a height of 2 or 3 meters, the machine hovered and collapsed. Soldiers of the emergency team pulled Denisov out from under the wreckage. The pilot, fortunately, was not seriously injured. The next day he was back in the line. The front commander highly appreciated the merits of aerial scouts, awarding them the Order of the Red Banner. When our ground units went on the offensive, the 6th Guards Regiment was ordered to destroy enemy aircraft at the Polotsk airfield and disable the runway. 12 crews led by I. F. Pavlov went on the assault. Ivan Fomich Pavlov began to fight as a sergeant. Now he is a major. On his account, 250 combat sorties. The famous master of assault strikes was twice awarded the high title of Hero of the Soviet Union. He put many young pilots into service, taught the art of combat, including Senior Lieutenant Sergei Afanasyev and Ivan Shabelnikov, assigned to his group of Wingmen 6. The enemy airfield was guarded by anti-aircraft artillery and other means of air defense. But the pilots on Crocs and large-scale maps have studied the approaches to it, were well versed in anti-aircraft maneuver. They went to the target at extremely low altitude, going to the reference point, made a slide all of a sudden and gained altitude of 100 meters. Before the attack aircraft opened green field of the airfield, 2 Fokker 190 were ready to take off. It was necessary to destroy them first. The first to open fire, Captain D. Tarasov, one airplane he hit with rockets, the other cannon and machine gun salvos. Then all 12 attack aircraft dropped bombs on parking lots and airfield buildings. During the second approach of the Ilov, one enemy fighter managed to take off. He tried to attack the attackers, but the air gunners' friendly fire shot him down. Leading the group captain I, F. Pavlov opened fire on another taking off Fokker. The machine turned sharply to the right, caught its wing on the ground, turned over several times and burst into flames. Pilot Shevchenko dropped bombs on the ammunition depot. The blast wave threw his plane upwards, and Shevchenko lost consciousness for a while. At the very ground, he came to his senses and took the sludge out of dive. Hitlerites opened heavy fire on Ill. The sky was filled with black and white caps of anti-aircraft shells bursts. However, it was already too late. The attack planes completed the task, destroyed 10 fighters, blew up ammunition and fuel depots. Almost all the planes of Pavlov's group had holes. Especially suffered Sludge Karasik. But the pilot still found courage to continue the flight on the damaged airplane and reached the airfield of Yula. For skillful actions, the front command announced to the participants of this flight a commendation. True, beforehand, the head of the political department of our army, General M. Moskilev, asked me, "They say that you have a good job with the photo control of combat operations." "Not badly. You see, Sergei Sergeyevich," continued the general, "the Allies do not believe in the power of attack aircraft and their crushing blows. They ask to confirm it with photos. Please, I can give you as many pictures as you like. Then a representative of TASS will come to you. Let him choose what he needs." An hour later, an employee of the telegraph agency arrived. He took photographic documents confirming the excellent work of our attack pilots. Then TESS employees came to us many more times for such photos. In cooperation with the 1st Tank Corps, we continued to pursue the retreating enemy. To clarify the situation, I flew with a wing of attack aircraft for reconnaissance. In the area of the town of Lepel on an interlake hill, I found Hitlerite fortifications. On a small area was concentrated 6 artillery batteries, which were shelling the only road linking the left flank of our troops, with tanks advancing on Lepel. It was impossible to bypass the enemy's defense. There was only one thing left: to destroy the anti-tank junction. For this purpose, I ordered to raise 2 regiments of attack aircraft in the air. Only a massive strike could paralyze the enemy. Squadrons led P. Arafiev Makarov A. Mironov V. Aki Sologub Vevsachikov V. A. Aishkov B. A. Reichkov B. Povalchik, and having crossed the front line, the planes turned around and in the right bearing took a course to the target, and here justified itself developed in the division tactical maneuver to attack suddenly in groups with the simultaneous use of all types of weapons attack aircraft. Squadron after squadron, at a set distance, approached the fortified area of the Nazis. Captain G. Denisov was in the lead. Here he is already over the landmark indicated by me, lies down exactly on a course of 240 degrees. In 2 minutes of flight, the squadron dropped bombs. Several enemy guns exploded into the air. I'm commanding on the radio. Work in the area of the fire. Following Denisov, the other groups attacked the target. The final blow was made by me with my scouting team. Many pilots, including young ones, distinguished themselves. Junior Lieutenant Ivan Prikazhikov showed resourcefulness. When leaving the attack, he saw on the edge of a birch grove, which was behind the artillery batteries, a pyramid of ammunition boxes. Having reported this to the commander, the pilot received the order. Prikazhikov dropped 2 bombs on the target, then hit it with rockets. Where there was a warehouse with ammunition, flames and a black mushroom-shaped cap went up. As a result of the raid attack aircraft, defensive node of the enemy was left without guns and shells. This greatly facilitated the advance of our ground troops. Telling about it, I wanted to emphasize that the attackers, acting independently, had a full opportunity to creatively solve the task, to show initiative. But even the most flexible tactics will not bring victory if you do not teach people to apply it correctly, not to instill in them the ability to quickly navigate in an unexpectedly changed situation. Division Command systematically organized classes on tactics and air combat. The pilots studied directly at the airplanes or in the green classroom, in a forest clearing. On an ordinary blackboard, they drew diagrams, made various calculations. Everyone took the lessons seriously. They kept small notes, actively participated in interviews of the atmosphere of creativity in the study of combat capabilities of the attack aircraft was constantly supported by political workers. On this topic in the units held party meetings, conversations and political informations. Aviators were read the orders of the Supreme Command and operational reports of the Soviet Inform Bureau. At the command post was posted a map on which notes were made about the advance of our troops. Komsomol activists worked well, especially remembered to me Junior Lieutenant Nikolai Osipov. Short stature, with mischievously sticking out from under the helmet curly bangs, this 19-year-old young man was sociable, cheerful conversationalist. The youth of one of the squadrons of Bolotov's regiment elected him Komsorg, and they were not mistaken. Nikolai was an example for his peers in everything. I met him in the spring of 1944, when he was just getting acquainted with the regiment, studying new equipment, combat experience of veteran pilots. Osipov received his baptism of fire on the first day of the Vitebsk-Kolotsk operation, having flown 3 sorties. On June 24, Nikolai suppressed an enemy anti-aircraft gun firing at a group of attack aircraft and received the first frontline commendation from the squadron commander. On the second day, he destroyed a Nazi tank and set fire to a Focke-Wulf that tried to attack the aircraft of the leading group. About successes of Junior Lieutenant Osipov became known to aviators of the whole division. Such eagles will not let you down in battle, will not leave you in trouble, was said about Nikolai. Soon I presented the young pilot with the Order of the Red Banner. Osipov assured that he would fight the enemy even more ruthlessly. He kept his word. The same day he took part in the defeat of an enemy convoy with fuel and ammunition. When Nikolai was awarded the Second Order of the Red Banner for his combat deeds, the Komsomol members of the squadron unanimously elected him their Komsomol leader. On July 10, Lieutenant F. Sajikov again led the squadron on a mission. In its composition was and Komsomol leader Nikolai Osipov. The pilots stormed the enemy columns, retreating to the Baltics on the only road from Beshenkovichi to Lepel. The blow was precise and powerful. Our troops had to clear the road from the wreckage of enemy equipment, attacking Hitlerites. Osipov was so carried away that he dropped to extremely low altitude and chopped the heads of the invaders with the propeller of his airplane. When we returned to the airfield, the commander said to Nikolai, "To set an example for young people, a laudable thing, but unnecessary risk should not." Once, storming the enemy's artillery positions, a group of ILOV, led by Senior Lieutenant V. Sologub, used a new tactical technique. It consisted in the fact that the pilots attacked the target in pairs and not from the circle one by one, as it was done before. Who initiated such an attack? I asked Sologub. Nerkamsor Osipov. He rushed into the attack at the same time as me. First he dropped bombs on the target, then, coming out of the dive, hit the enemy's firing points with machine guns and cannons. It made me very happy. Since that day, when I conducted military tests of the IL-2 aircraft, did not stop thinking about the need for simultaneous impact on the target by all types of weapons attack aircraft, and now practice has shown that the new tactical technique was very effective. Tested again and again. The results are excellent. This was confirmed by photo control and reviews of General Army commanders. Reporting everything to the commander of the 3rd Air Army, General N.F. Papivin, and Air Chief Marshal A. Novikov. I asked permission to proceed to group attacks of targets. Soon such permission was received. Moreover, our experience spread to other units of the attack aviation. Using a new tactical technique, we, in cooperation with the tankers, completed the defeat of the enemy group near Beshenkovichi, and then relentlessly pursued the enemy retreating in the direction of Boyshakovo, Kamen Dunilovich, Grub. Our air scouts found a large accumulation of German wagons, military equipment, vehicles with infantry on the road leading to Lepel. Sobotin's group was the first to attack. The pilots attacked the head of the column. Immediately several cars caught fire. A traffic jam was formed. The enemy had nowhere to turn, swamps all around. Aritiav's squadron hit the tail of the column. The enemy was trapped on both sides. Then in the area of the assault appeared other units. Bombs were falling on Hitlerites' heads. Rockets were flying. Panic-stricken fascists were overtaken by machine gun and cannon queues. After the defeat of the enemy column, the commander of the front, Army General Iaxis Bagramian, ordered to bring the commanders of squadrons and regiments to the battle site, so that they could see with their own eyes what a huge damage was done to the Germans. Tass of the troops of the 1st Baltic Front successfully completed the Vitebsk-Polotsk operation. The result of this great combat work was summed up in the order of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief No. 193 of July 10, 1940. Among other units and formations, our 335th Air Assault Division was named Vitebsk. After the completion of the operation to us, in the 3rd Air Army, came Colonel General of Aviation Grigory Alexievich Vorozikin to discuss the question of whether to leave in the armament of the aircraft attack aircraft rockets, or external suspension of ES reduced the flight speed by 20-25 kilometers per hour. However, this was of no practical importance. The attack aircraft always reached the target exactly at the specified time. Well, what if a fighter is chasing me? What difference does it make? I fly at a speed of 300 or 325 kilometers. The fighter will catch up with me. I arrived late to the meeting because I was not informed about it in time. G.A. Vorozikin had already summarized the results. So the general opinion is as follows: to remove the jet shells from the attack aircraft. Any other suggestions? Asked the general. I have an opposite opinion. Allow me to justify it. I objected. Report. There is no need to prove that rockets are powerful weapons, that it affects the enemy not only with great destructive power, but also morally. Then I proceeded to more detailed justifications. They boil down to the fact that if you remove from the armament of stormtroopers Irisa, the effectiveness of attacks will be significantly worsened. It gave calculated data. In one flight, regiment raises and drops on the target 240 rockets. And since we make an average of 3 combat sorties, this figure increases threefold. This is a blow of enormous force. Is it worth it to reduce the firepower of attack aircraft so drastically? Colonel General of Aviation G.A. Vorosaikin wrote. A. Vorosaikin wrote down the calculations and said that the final decision will be made in Moscow. The matter ended with the fact that the front began to arrive at the attack aircraft without suspension beams for Ares. However, they were soon ordered to install them again. Before the battles in the Baltics, it was very important. In July 1944, the troops of the First Baltic Front, commanded by Army General EMEX Bagramian, came to the approaches to Daugavpils and Panevėžys. This whole area was strongly defended by the enemy. The settlements of Berezenko, Myadzia, Kobaliki, Smenpiani, Utina, Onyxti and Kupishkino were especially strong defences. Here the Germans erected strong anti-tank bulwarks, densely mined all roads, dug self-propelled guns, and tanks into the ground on the sides of forest clearings. The approaches to the cities Daugavpils and Panevėžys were under fire. The air defence was also powerful. Railroad junctions, warehouses with ammunition and fuel were guarded by anti-aircraft artillery units. On the surrounding airfields were pooled the best units of German fighter aviation. The command of our troops took all measures to ensure that with the least losses in manpower and equipment to break the enemy defences and go to the sea. The main forces of artillery, including guards, mortars, concentrated fighter, bomber and attack aviation, pulled up parts of the 19th Tank Corps. Supreme High Command attached exceptional importance to the forthcoming operation. Stavka was daily interested in the progress of its preparation, and just before the offensive the Chief of the General Staff of the Red Army Marshal of the Soviet Union, Gem. Vasilevsky, came to us. I was returning from another reconnaissance flight. Having parked the car and turned off the engine, I saw Captain Zhivago, an officer of the division headquarters, running towards my plane. Jumped on the wing of the attack aircraft and reported. Air Army Commander General Papvin ordered by the end of the day all the composition of the compound to relocate to the forest airfield. In frontline conditions, relocation is quite common and not uncommon. However, this time I did not know exactly the reason for the urgent transfer of regiments to another site. The division was moved closer to the front line in case of a possible breakthrough of enemy tanks and infantry. The task was responsible, so I decided to go to the reconnaissance of the new airfield, which was located 20 kilometers west of the town of Beshenkovichi. In case of a meeting with the enemy, I took Major Labzukov, an experienced and brave air fighter. We found the forest ground relatively quickly. We had a rather vague idea about it. We knew that once there flew there light airplanes that served the partisan detachment. For safety reasons, I ordered my partner to patrol over the forest and myself went to land. I landed safely, but after a short run the wheels of the attack aircraft immediately bogged down in the loose soil. Without turning off the engine, got out of the cockpit, walked down the runway, if you can call it a small piece of land among the pine trees, then taxied back and forth. There was a deep trail behind the car. I see the radio gunner shaking his head. Well, what an airfield? It's nothing. I told him. We can work. Let's cut branches and mark the runway with them. Having managed this simple task, we got into the airplane and took off. Immediately Labzukov joined us, and we set a course to our base. What a dust behind you rose, said the major, approaching my plane in the parking lot, higher than the pine tops. How will we take off with bombs? With bombs we cannot. The airplanes will get bogged down. I'll report to the commander. General Papivin listened to me carefully. The ground is bad, you say? Yes. The situation is getting more complicated. Nevertheless, the division must be relocated. It's necessary, Comrade Alexandrov. The attack aircraft must be ready to fight against a possible breakthrough of German tanks and infantry. But the Ilyas with full bomb load won't be able to take off from this site. What to do, Comrade General? Papivin made a short pause, then ordered, don't suspend the bombs. Take with you Ares and a full machine gun set. That's what we did. Regiments relocated to the forest airfield, dispersed their planes on the edge of the forest, well camouflaged them, organized combat duty. At dawn, the front commander, Army General I. Bagramian, came to us. 7 fighters escorting a military transport airplane appeared next. The 2-engine airship landed. Marshal of the Soviet Union, M. Vasilevsky, came out of it. I reported to him that the 335th Vitebsk Air Assault Division was based here. Having accepted the report, the Marshal asked whether the unit was fully staffed with flight personnel and aircraft. whether the aviators knew their tasks for the coming period. A little later, we learned that the representative of the Stavka summarized the results of the Vitebsk-Polotsk operation, personally familiarized himself with the situation on the First Baltic Front, and gave the necessary instructions on the further deployment of the offensive in the Baltics. Soon after the departure of Marshal Vasilevsky and Army General I.X. Bagramian, we flew to a new airfield closer to the front and began to ensure the offensive of the 19th Tank Corps in the Libavian direction. One by one, the attack planes went up into the sky and, having gathered in a group, went to the west. Among others, the crews of Komsomol members Andreev and Rudnev went on a mission. Letters on the fuselages of their airplanes in large letters are written for Zina Tesnolobova, for the young underground heroes of the city of Krivoy Rog. I look at these inscriptions and remember the Komsomol meeting in the 683rd Air Assault Regiment, where I was present at the discussion of two unusual letters. One of them came from a former medical sergeant, Zinaida Tusnolobova, the other from students and teachers of a school in Krivoy Rog. "My dear friends," Zina wrote, "let this letter reach the heart of each of you. It is written by a person whom the Germans deprived of everything: happiness, health, youth. I am 23 years old. For 15 months I have been confined to a hospital bed. I have neither arms nor legs. The Germans did it." The girl further reported that, as a nurse, she carried 123 wounded soldiers with their personal weapons from the battlefield. During one of the enemy attacks, Zina was wounded in the legs. She pretended to be dead. Seeing the lifeless body of the Russian girl, the fascists began trampling her, beating her with rifle butts. And here I ask you, my relatives, when you go into the attack, remember me and do not spare the damned fascists. Exterminate them like rabid dogs. Avenge them for me, for hundreds of thousands of Russian innocent girls languishing in German slavery. I have a brother, but he can no longer avenge me. He, too, was left without hands. In the letter of Krivoy Rog citizens, it was told how Hitlerites brutally massacred young patriots who helped adults to fight for liberation of native city. Assistant Chief of the Political Department of the Division to work among the Komsomol P, Efimov, and Komsomol leader of the Regiment B. Kotliareski in their speeches urged young people to respond warmly to the letters full of bitterness and heartache, to smash the invaders even more mercilessly, to avenge them for the tears and blood of the Soviet people, for the destroyed towns and villages. Then a member of the Komsomol Bureau of the unit pilot Pyotr Andreev took the floor. "I think," he said, "that there is not a single person among us who would not be excited by the letter of Zina Tusnolobova. I want to scream with anger. I urge everyone, no mercy for the invaders, for Zina Tusilage of my airplane, for Zina Tusnolobova, and to the last drop of blood I will take revenge on the enemies for the heroic girl." Then spoke pilot Arkady Rudnev. Young underground fighters of Krivoy Rog died in the terrible Gestapo walls. They fought for the freedom of our motherland, fought with all means available to them. Young men and girls helped us, the frontline soldiers. Their selflessness evokes a sense of pride for our Soviet people, obliges each of us to beat the damned fascists with mortal combat. I ask the command to allow me to make an inscription on the fuselage of my airplane for the young underground heroes of the city of Krivoy Rog. The request of both pilots was granted, and the Komsomol members honorably justified this high trust. Together with other pilots, they crushed fascists in the area of Vitebsk, Polotsk, Koenigsberg, on the Zemland Peninsula. Peter Andreev and Arkady Rudnev received their first awards for the liberation of Polotsk in July 1944. They finished the war as heroes of the Soviet Union. By the way, many aviators of our division distinguished themselves in the battles for Polotsk. On behalf of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR and the High Command, I, together with the head of the Political Department IT, Kalugin, presented orders to pilots V. Gudyaev I, Platonov N. Osipov V. Sukev V. Karpetskov, M. Salomatin. For the fourth time, the motherland honored the brave officer M. Papsuev. Captain Mikhail Mikhailovich Papsuev came to us as navigator of the regiment. Getting acquainted with him, I learned that before the war he began his service in aviation, flying many types of combat aircraft. On July 22, 1941, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Papsuev, as part of a squadron of dive bombers, Petlikov II bombed a German airfield near the city of Galati on the Danube. Hitlerites did not expect a raid of our aviation. Their airplanes were standing on the airfield. Preparation for the next flight was going on. P-2, which were led by Mikhail Papsuev, spiked right on the airfield. From the first approach, 2 airplanes, several gasoline refuelers were destroyed. A hangar was destroyed. Then the squadron made 3 more runs, as a result of which 16 bombers were burned. Fuel and lubricants warehouse was blown up. The runway was out of order. Hitlerites did not restore the airfield, being afraid of repeated raids. In his return from the combat mission, Captain Papsuev had a great joy. The commissar of the regiment PI, Aristov, handed him a party ticket. Let's return, however, to the events of July 1944. As an experienced aviation commander, Captain Papsuev was sent to the 19th Tank Corps. The officer's task was to guide the attack aircrafts to the targets, to inform the pilots by radio about the actual air and ground situation. He was assigned an armoured personnel carrier with a radio station and an anti-aircraft installation of large-caliber machine guns. On one of the cloudy days, when the sky was densely covered with low clouds, the tank units began to move to the front line. At dawn the next day, rumbled volleys of guns began a powerful artillery preparation. Under the cover of fire, sappers came to the river, and anti-tank guns were pulled up, which hit the opposite bank with direct fire. On the bridge built by sappers, the tank corps rushed to the west. At this time, over the crossing appeared 7 of our attack aircraft, led by the deputy commander of the squadron's 683rd Air Regiment, Senior Lieutenant Boris Padalko. Knowing the situation well, Captain Papsuev redirected the planes, directing them to the second line of enemy defences, east of the village of Treshkiai. The attack planes, alternately entering the dive, dropped bombs, then shelled the enemy trenches from ERS, cannons and machine guns. The 19th Corps was advancing in 3 directions. In the centre went mechanized brigade, on the right and left of it, 2 tank brigades. Retreating, the Nazis clung to every settlement, every village. However, despite the stubborn opposition, our troops, with the support of aviation, led a successful offensive. Transitions were difficult, especially at night. For camouflage purposes, cars, tractors and tanks moved with lights out. Sometimes one of the crew members went out on the road, attached a newspaper on his back and walked forward. Orienting on this white spot, the driver drove the car, and so sometimes moved more than 12 kilometers. In the area of the town of Cedar, the column, in which was M. Papsuev, was stopped by artillery fire. Hitlerites were shooting from the farm and forest. Shells were tearing around, bullets were whistling. The commander of the brigade, who arrived in a Willys, ordered to comb the area. Groups of machine gunners entered the forest and engaged the enemy. To help their comrades, a group of attack aircraft, headed by the squadron commander of the 683rd Regiment, Kovalchik, urgently flew out. On Captain Papsuev's command, he turned the airplanes around and they struck the farm. Then appeared Katyusha. Having made a few volleys each, the guards' mortars quickly left. The fight did not subside. It was seen how the famous 30 Checkers went into the attack. From the control room of the commander of the Mech Brigade, I received a conditional waiting for help. I immediately ordered to raise in the air several groups of airplanes. They led to the target P, Luptovmov, Tikhonov, P, Andreev, and A, Polyakov. On the approach to the target area, attack aircraft came under heavy fire from anti-aircraft artillery. Since Il-2 were flying at low altitude, the Nazis fired not only from anti-aircraft guns, but even from machine guns, automatic rifles, carbines, and pistols. An enemy shell punctured the engine on the airplane of Lieutenant Dumbobrov. It was dangerous to continue the flight, and then Captain M. Papsuev told the pilot the direction of landing, gradually descending, turning to the right, then to the left. The lieutenant did not stop firing guns and machine guns. He landed the burning machine in the location of our troops. For selflessness in the performance of military duty, the crew commander at Bobrov was awarded the Order of the Red Star. Having suppressed the enemy defense node, the tankers went forward again. Offensive of the Corps, its exit to the Baltic Sea allowed to cut off a large group of enemy troops near Riga. Hitlerites understood it, and with all forces and means counteracted the advance to the west of the Soviet tank and other units. In the area Prikul, Saldus, our troops met a strong artillery fire. All attempts to seize these settlements on the move were unsuccessful. The enemy's defense, prepared in advance, along the railroad from Prikul to Memel, proved to be quite strong. The ground troops again needed the help of attacking aircraft. However, thick cloud cover and frequent rain limited our activity. Then we decided to change tactics. We began to operate in small groups of 2-4 airplanes. We bombed mainly from a shore flight, flew free hunting. Such flights were allowed to well-trained crews who were fluent in airplane navigation in difficult meteorological conditions. Once the division headquarters was informed that it was necessary to destroy an enemy railroad train approaching Freak Station, on a combat mission sent a group of attack aircraft led by Master Bombing Major Denisov. Unfavorable weather did not prevent the aviators to accurately reach the target and deliver a concentrated bombing strike on the echelon. The photo equipment installed on the airplanes captured the burning cars and other fires. Of course, single crews or small groups of attack aircraft, we could not make a significant impact on the enemy defences in the area pre-Q Scaldus, and to make a massive strike did not allow weather conditions. Soon fogs and rains chained the airplanes to the airfield. Taking advantage of this circumstance, Hitlerites undertook a counterattack. They put into battle self-propelled guns, tanks, mechanized infantry, and, without camouflage, moved to the positions of our ground. Give at least a few attack aircraft, we received a radiogram. But who to send if the cloud cover, as pilots say, is lower than a crutch? The crews of Captain A. Mironov, hero of the Soviet Union, were on combat duty. Mironov. I called the squadron commander to the CP, explained the situation. My comrade captain, Nizzy to Mironov. There is no weather, we need to fly. Yes, comrade colonel. A few minutes later, the planes, splashing puddles, turned out to start. Having received permission to take off, they were hardly lifted off the ground and at the border of the airfield disappeared in a pale, cloudy shroud. Radio communication with the crews immediately stopped. Low flight altitude, sharply rugged terrain reduced the range of radio transmissions to the limit. Maybe I was in a hurry. What if the target would be covered by fog, and the ground troops will not be saved, and the pilots will be killed? Near the command post gathered pilots and technicians. Everyone was talking about only one thing, on what reserve airfield to land the airborne vehicles. But they could not think of anything suitable. All around were forests and swamps. Time dragged agonizingly slow, and Captain Mironov did not receive a single radiogram. Where were his crews? What about them? They had fuel left, according to the regiment navigator Major Petrov, for 20 to 25 minutes of flight. Finally, in the speaker at the command post, there was a crackle of interference, among which we barely distinguished the voice of Mironov. Immediately we told him that the airfield was about to be covered by fog and that it was necessary to land immediately. Attention, the captain warned his crews. All keep in bearing, do not break away. I'll lead everyone to land. I myself land last. Mironov literally transferred the airplanes from the sky to the ground. Barely touching the ground, they disappeared behind a dense milky curtain. No one saw how the squadron commander's car landed, only by the sharp engine exhausts coming from the fog. We determined that his attack aircraft was finishing its run. Everything quieted down. Pilots and air gunners who returned from a combat mission came to the control room. They were asked dozens of questions. What was the weather on the route? How they acted in the target area? What resistance the enemy offered? Whether it was difficult to make a landing? When the excitement subsided, Captain Mironov reported. On the approach to the target, the cloud cover began to thin. The Germans did not expect a raid, so no air defense was not organized. We hit them from low altitude, for sure. There were no misses. On the way back, they passed over our position. The soldiers were throwing their hats up in joy and waving their hands in greeting. In general, the mission was accomplished. I congratulated the pilots and ordered the regiment commander to give Mironov and his subordinates photos depicting the results of their combat operations. To each picture were glued photo cards of the participants of this difficult sortie. Using the pause caused by inclement weather, technicians, mechanics, and other specialists put in order airplanes, engines, weapons, radio, and electrical equipment. Our technical staff was experienced. Often the planes returned with damaged steering, riddled planes and fuselages, punctured gas tanks. Sometimes it seemed that the airplane could not be restored, but toilers, friends, and helpers of pilots showed initiative, ingenuity, worked day and night, and still put the fighting machines into service. In the 6th Moscow Guards Regiment, there were many fellow countrymen from Yaroslavl, including pilot Anatoly Smirnov and technician Lieutenant Nikolay Voroboyev. One say, Smirnov brought his machine from a mission in such a state that it took about a week to restore it, according to the repairman. What was the surprise when NAJLE Dave Vorobyov reported after 2 days? The airplane is ready for flight. How did you do it? Engineer Morozov asked him. The commander asked me very much. Well, the guys from the squadron helped me to replace the rudder, aileron linkage, emergency landing gear release cables, fix the holes in the airframe. I'd had to be repaired not only on airfields or in field aircraft repair shops. Damaged attack aircraft sometimes landed on the neutral strip between our front line and the enemy trenches. Even in this case, the technicians found a way out. Hero of the Soviet Union NI, Chuvin, barely pulling the front line, made a forced landing in close proximity to the German defences. To prevent the machine from falling into enemy hands, it had to be evacuated. A special team headed by Technician Lieutenant Mikhail Stoyukin was sent to perform this task. Under the fire of German mortars, machine gunners, the team members managed to dismantle the Il-2 and took it to their airfield by truck. For skillful actions and personal bravery, Yaroslavl resident Mikhail Stoyukin was awarded the Order of the Red Star. There was a case when Nikolai Ivanovich Chuvin brought his attack aircraft from the battle, literally riddled with enemy shell splinters. Technicians counted 300 holes. Even could not believe that the captain managed to escape from the downpour of lead on such a ship, but it was a fact, and the technical staff restored the airplane. No, thank you, friends. The pilot thanked the specialists. Once Il-2, which was maintained by Technician Lieutenant Markovsky, mechanic Senior Sergeant Alisev and motorist Private Twetinov, was badly damaged by anti-aircraft artillery. However, the pilot still made it to his airfield and landed. Inspection showed that the airplane was unfit. It required complicated engine and airframe repairs. At the end of the day came the order, the regiment to relocate to another airfield as the enemy broke through the line of our defences. Markovsky begged the unit commander to allow him, Alisev and Viritinov, to stay. They did not want to abandon the attack aircraft, which, in their opinion, could be restored. Okay, agreed the commander, having consulted with engineers V. Titov and Mr. Morozov. Tomorrow at dawn I will send for you Po-2. Technician, mechanic, and motorist began work. They started with the most difficult thing, replacement of the cylinder head. There was no spare such unit. It had to be removed from another machine that was to be destroyed. It's hard to imagine the whole amount of work. It was necessary to remove armoured plates on 2 planes, almost completely dismantle 2 engines, and then from them to assemble one, to make a complete adjustment of gas distribution and ignition. Until morning the specialist did not sleep a wink, but the machine was repaired. Senior Sergeant Alisev, who served 270 combat sorties and repaired 15 airplanes together with Parmovitz, showed special skill. Having equipped a shelter for themselves and camouflaged the attack aircraft, the friends began to wait for the Po-2. Suddenly a German reconnaissance plane appeared. He made a circle over the airfield, marking it with a ring of white smoke. It means that enemy aviation will come here soon. Will ours be in time? Worried motorist. They will, Mather encouraged him. Markovsky, the commander of the regiment, promised. At last a Po-2 appeared from behind the forest. He quickly landed and approached the camouflaged attack aircraft. One of the arriving pilots quickly jumped into the cockpit of the sludge. With the help of a technician, started and tested the engine. The engine and instruments worked normally. Markovsky ordered Twetinov to sit on the Po-2, and himself with Alisev somehow squeezed into the cockpit air gunner Il-2. The pilot gave the gas, and the machine took off. Beyond the border of the airfield, attack aircraft overtook, flying over the forest corn plain. The regiment command presented the technician, mechanic, and motorist to government awards, and Alisev, in addition, was awarded the military rank of petty officer. The example of exceptional diligence, thrift, and high culture in work was set by Vladislav Evgenievich Titov, senior engineer of the division, to his subordinates. He never left the unit if not all airplanes were prepared for the next combat flight. The lieutenant colonel not only controlled the engineering staff, but also often put on overalls and helped aircraft specialists to eliminate the most difficult defects directly on the aircraft or engine. It is no secret that sometimes we lacked spare parts, and here V. Titov never missed a chance to remove everything suitable from the decommissioned machine, parts units, surviving assemblies. As for the attack aircraft that returned from combat missions badly damaged, the engineer took all measures to ensure that the regimental specialists and Parmov's men would certainly restore them. "It's all right, my friends," he used to say to the repairman. "We'll fix them up. Where can we get new airplanes? It is necessary to protect the people's good." Squadron Commander F.I. Sadchikov informed Titov that in a clearing in the woods not far from the highway lies Fuselage L2. I saw the engineer's eyes light up. He said to his deputy for repair M. Morozov, "Let's fly. Let's see. Maybe it is serviceable. Maybe it landed without fuel." By the way, Itai Titov flew independently. Even before the war, he graduated from the Aero Club at the State Research Institute. After inspection, the airplane was pulled out of the bombardment zone, restored, and then flew on it, beating the knots. The armament service of the division was headed by Major I.A. Baranuk. He was able to so train his subordinates that the weapons they prepared always worked perfectly. Major, despite his 40-plus years, also often flew in the cockpit of an aerial gunner. More often than not, he performed machine gun firing in the air, debugging weapons. As if a non-staff duty Baranuk was the organization of the defense of our airfields. It is to him belongs the initiative to create special small rocket launchers, with the help of which he prevented an enemy attack on the airfields of Beshenkovici and Povatici. The command appreciated the merits of the officer, awarding him the Second Order of the Red Banner. Excellent coped with his duties engineer for special equipment Lepel. Instruments always, especially during flights in clouds, fog and at night, were reliable assistants of pilots. Engineering staff has always been admired for their painstaking daily work, but the pilots were especially proud of those specialists who, in case of lack of air gunners, sat in the rear cockpit to the machine gun and flew into battle. So, not once and not twice went up in the air Yagodian, Vasyakin, Chaplin, Chesnokov, Abramov, Valdeyev, political workers Smirnov, Trufanov, Efremov, and when squadrons had to land at a new airfield after the battle, all leading technicians flew as part of the crews to prepare airplanes for the next combat mission. August 7, 1944, the attack pilots Shabelnikov, Tarasov, Solovyov, Yakubenko, Mushchinkin, and Shaldov were assigned the task, at 14 hours, to strike at enemy manpower and artillery northwest of the town of Burzai. Ilyushainy, accompanied by 6 Yok-3 fighters, and approaching the location of German troops, Il-2 crew commanders increased the interval and distance. Captain Shabelnikov was the first to drop bombs on the target. When leaving the attack, he saw 8 U-87s coming at an altitude of 400 meters to our front line. Ivan Shabelnikov radioed to his wingman, "Let's attack the Junkers." Nas was the first to fire a cannon line at the flagship. The bomb carrier smoked and crashed into the ground. At the turn in the sight of air gunner Severtsev hit another Junkers, and he did not let him go. Thus, in the first minutes of the air battle, the crew of the leader of our attack aircraft destroyed 2 enemy aircraft. This encouraged Shabelnikov's comrades in arms. Following the example of the commander, pilot D.D., Tarasov also attacked one of the German bombers. He pressed the trigger, but for some reason the weapon did not. "It turns out, Tarasov told after returning to the airfield. "Having stormed off, I put the guns and machine guns on the safety. What an oversight, however, the enemy did not leave. The pilot V. Solovyev, who followed to my left, set the fascist on fire with 2 bursts of cannons. My comrade corrected my mistake. In the midst of the battle suddenly appeared German fighter cover Focke-Wulfs. One of them rushed at Solovyev's plane. Neftfoker warned Tarasov his friend. "As we see," he replied. The radio gunner from Solovyev's crew apparently hesitated, and the enemy fighter managed to fire several bursts at the attack aircraft. As a result, the gunner Karlamov was seriously wounded. 6 Yaks, led by Captain Donsov, simultaneously fought with Junkers and Focke-Wulfs. Noticing the Nazi fighter just attacked Solovyev, Captain Donsov radioed his deputy, Senior Lieutenant Schleich. "Lead the battle. I am pursuing the Focke." The duel lasted a short time. Donsov chose the most advantageous position and from a distance of 50-60 meters opened fire on the Nazi. The German fighter awkwardly tilted to the right wing, then, tumbling, fell into the swamp. At the same time, Senior Lieutenant Yakubenko directed his attack aircraft at another Junkers and took aim at the bomb hatch. A short burst from the guns, and the bomber was blown to splinters. The attacks of our pilots were so rapid and successful that the U-87s could not withstand the onslaught, mixed and began to leave the battle zone haphazardly. Pursuing the enemy, Captain Duntsov shot down another machine. Having fallen into a forest thicket, it turned into a bonfire. Now it was left to disperse the Focke-Wulfs. Some Mi-109s came to their aid, and again there was a hot battle during which our fighters Shleikov, Gusev, Balagurov and Romanov shot down one Messerschmitt each. The air battle was already ending when V. Solovyov reported to the commander of the group of attack aircraft. "Shooter in a serious condition. I'm going to the nearest airfield." In the line remained 5 EL. Cover fighters, having finished their work, went to the base. Ivan Shabelnikov also led his 5 home. Suddenly his plane began to smoke. The attack aircraft began to lose altitude and speed. "Oh, there's smoke in the cockpit. I can't see the ground very well," the captain said over the radio. His car was flying straight at the barn. Ivan, Tarasov said to him, "turn to the left." Shabelnikov flew next to the barn, but ahead appeared a bridge. "More to the left, more." The group commander passed this obstacle. Then at low speed landed the car on the fuselage and gave first aid to the wounded air gunner Sivitsev. Tarasov patrolled above them until Shabelnikov gave him a hand signal. "Everything is all right. Go to the airfield." The news of the successful combat flight of Captain Shabelnikov's group immediately flew around all regiments of the division. In the units and subdivisions there were held talks. There were issued combat leaflets and bulletins, where it was told about courageous pilots and air gunners who shot down 9 enemy planes, destroyed several fire points and dozens of Hitler's soldiers and officers. Many crews of the 355th Air Division, including young pilots, distinguished themselves in air battles over the city of Burzai and during the breakthrough of the defense in the section Prekul. It seems that not so long ago Lieutenant Alexander Volkov was considered to be average, not particularly distinguished among his comrades in arms. And here I see on the stand near the control room sheet lightning, young pilots. Take an example from Lieutenant Volkov. Learn from him to perform anti-reverse maneuver. Mew, said the text. Sasha Volkov is a citizen of Gorky. Working as a turner at the Krasno-Sormovo plant, he graduated from the Baranov Aero Club in 1940. Having independently risen into the sky of his native city, the young man did not think himself out of aviation. "I'll study to be a military pilot," he decided, and his dream came true. Alexander graduated from the School of Military Pilots and was soon sent to the front to the Pasha Division. Lieutenant Volkov acquired combat training under the guidance of the Masters of Assault Strikes Major P. Arafiev, Captain A. Mironov, Senior Lieutenants. Mironov, Senior Lieutenants B. Vasenin, G. Krasavin, V. Striganov. "I got into a family of real eagles," wrote Alexander to his factory friends after the first combat flight. In the 5 attack aircraft squadron commander Arafiev, who was at that time still a captain, took 2 young comrades in arms and Volkov and Junior Lieutenant Beleznov. The planes crossed the front line and took a course to the crossroads of highways near Panevizes. There, at the junction of 2 highways, a traffic jam was formed. Hitler's tanks and cars stretched for 2 kilometers. Under the cover of senior comrades Beleznov and Volkov went into the attack. With the first approach, they dropped bombs on the tanks. Then the rest of the attack aircraft fired at the enemy column of ERS. Sudden attack Ilov caused panic in the ranks of the enemy. Tanks and vehicles began to sprawl away from the road. Alexander Volkov saw how 2 tigers, camouflaged in a birch forest, began to fire at the planes. The lieutenant took them in his sights and fired rockets at them. Both tanks caught fire. On the way out of the dive, Volkov made a left turn, and his machine turned to the Baltic Sea. Before the eyes of the pilot opened vast expanse, cut by brown waves. Somewhere under them lay on the bottom of a Soviet submarine, which was sunk by the Nazis. On that submarine fought Alexander Volkov's brother, petty officer of the 2nd article, the secretary of the Komsomo organization of the crew, Pavel Ignatievich Volkov. Arfiev's group made 2 more approaches to the target. Alexander Volkov also dropped the rest of the bombs and shelled the fleeing Hitlerites from cannons and machine guns. On the roads were burning enemy tanks and vehicles. "This is for your brother, bastards," angrily said the lieutenant. On the way back, the 5 attack aircraft were attacked by German fighters. The plane of Junior Lieutenant Beleznov suffered the most. The machine with damaged tail plumage was not obeying the rudders well, losing speed. Boleslov realized that it was impossible to reach the airfield and ordered the air gunner radiator to jump out with a parachute. The altitude was low, so the radio operator pulled the extraction ring while still in the cockpit. The airflow pulled the dome. The slings got tangled on the machine gun turret. The gunner found himself tied to the attack aircraft. Worried for the life of a subordinate, the crew commander chose a suitable landing pad. With great difficulty landed. The air gunner told Boleslov how it all happened. "My fault, comrade junior lieutenant," he added at the end. "It was the first time I got into such an altercation." Soon a Potu arrived from the regiment, and Boleslov and his radio operator arrived safely at their airfield. And 2 or 3 days later, technicians restored the attack aircraft damaged in battle. Not so much time has passed since then, and these 2 young crew commanders have already entered the service, went to the mission more than once and proved to be brave airfighters. And today there is a lightning sheet dedicated to Lieutenant Volkov. "Youth is growing," said Major Arifiev, satisfied. "Young technicians are also drawn into the front rhythm of work. Said the division repair engineer M.I.R. Morozov. "There are no complaints about them in any regiment." Tense combat day was approaching evening. The last to land hero of the Soviet Union, Major N. Makarov. He approached the forest and turned off the powerful engine. At once it became quiet. Only a few verbal orders of engineers and senior technicians were heard, mechanics and motorists, specialists of the Airfield Maintenance Battalion, and Palmer, calculatingly and businesslike, prepared aircraft for the next flight. "Well, for today it seems everything," said Arifiev, looking at the parking lot of combat vehicles. And suddenly from behind the forest heard the noise of engines. It gradually increased, approaching the airfield. "Isn't it the enemy?" An alarming thought flashed through my mind. In the twilight a command was heard, "On target. Take anti-aircraft calculations, just in case, prepared for battle." And the rumble of engines was growing, became clearer. Now the ear already caught the familiar singing of powerful engines, then clearly outlined silhouettes of attack planes. "Ours," joyfully exclaimed Engineer Morozov. Yes, it was ill. To us flew replenishment. The starting radio station contacted the leader. The first group was led by the famous attack aircraft twice hero of the Soviet Union, Captain F.N. Pavlov. The second hero of the Soviet Union, Captain I. Mironov. Only the most experienced air fighters could find the airfield without landmarks among the forest. With the landing of the last airplane, the night came. In the canteen placed in the dugout, the lamps made of artillery shell casings burned brightly. Girls from the bio quickly set the tables for pilots and air gunners who returned from the mission. The waitresses had studied the tastes and habits of aviators, knew what to serve for dinner. We and the head of the political department, Colonel I.T. Kaligin, listened attentively to the lively conversations of people, entered into conversation with them, answered their questions. However, we knew the veterans relatively well. We were aware of their war record. We wanted to see the new recruits who had just arrived at the airfield. "All of them were not bad at landing in twilight conditions, said Kaligin. "So they're smart. There they are, WZ. I saw the newcomers timidly entering the dining room. Comrade officers, please accept the young addition to our fighting family." And immediately we heard exclamations. "Andrei, Boris, Sergei, Shura, Volodya, Ivan." Friends and comrades from school and reserve regiments met in the dugout. The tables became even more lively. Memories of the past days of study, short stories about the front days, jokes, laughter. Finally, those who had to go to battle in the morning left the dining room. There remained the young people who arrived. Junior Lieutenants Bondarenko, Goroshansky, Gorbenko, Pisklov, Feoktistov, and others. We ask how they are prepared for battle. The first to answer, Fektistov, a short, thin young man. "Ready, Comrade Colonel." "That's good," I say to him, "but let's not be in a hurry. We need to familiarize each of you with the area of combat operations, with the peculiarities of attack flights. In addition, you need to learn the experience of advanced crews, senior comrades." Gorbenko, a tall, shouldered pilot with a noticeable disappointment, said, "And we were told that as soon as we arrive in the unit, immediately fly to the mission." "There is no need for that now," Colonel I.T. Kaligin answered him. "But there were cases when it was necessary, as they say, to send young pilots into battle. Those difficult days have passed, my friends." For several days, the replenishments familiarized with the situation, got used to the team. and now came the time of baptism of fire newly arrived 15 crews. Cavalier of 3 Orders of the Red Banner, Captain M. Papsuev brought to the start of the battle flag of the unit. In front of the young people with a good farewell spoke Commander, renowned veterans. In this solemn atmosphere, the newcomers gave their word to fight the enemy courageously and skillfully, to protect the commanders in battle, to protect each other from the sudden attack of the Nazis. The first 2-6 led to the task-known Sniper Squadron Commander G. Denisov. The second 2 flew under the command of Captains V.V. Reitkov and Senior Lieutenant S.E. Kovalchik. The front line stood out in relief. On the edge of the forest were visible enemy trenches, accumulation of vehicles and manpower. Nazi airplanes did not patrol over their troops. This was favorable for the actions of our attack aircraft. Even before the flight, we warned the presenters that they, to avoid losses, to minimize the number of approaches to the target. Young people accurately carried out the commands of their hosts. Here, Communist pilots Junior Lieutenants Karlev and Fektistov noticed that the anti-aircraft artillery was firing from the shelter. Having reported about it to their commander and having heard the attack, they went into dive and with an accurate blow silenced the enemy guns, thus providing freedom of action to their comrades. In this flight, Lieutenant IAJA Gorbenko blew up an ammunition depot. Other young attack aircraft also distinguished themselves. All 15 crews were honored with the gratitude of the command. The next morning, young people again took to the sky. Barely Illy crossed the front line, as got into a zone of heavy anti-aircraft fire. Skillfully maneuvering, Captain S. Kovalchik took his subordinates out from under fire and aimed at a cluster of enemy vehicles. There were about 100 of them. Planning at an angle of 25 degrees from a height of 800 to 100 meters, the pilots dropped a bomb load on the column. Many cars caught fire. Among the Hitlerites, panic began. Having made another run, the leader turned his group to the northeast. At the nearest railroad station, attack aircraft found 4 military echelons and attacked. In total, the wingmen of S. Kovalchik's wingmen made 12 attacks, destroying more than 20 vehicles and 5 ammunition wagons. The pilots not only accomplished the combat task, but also photographed the area of combat operations, where they additionally discovered a large number of new targets. The 683rd Attack Regiment was immediately dispatched to this area. One of the Ilyushin groups was led by Guards Senior Lieutenant G. Inosaridze. The commander and his wingmen Bleler, Polivodov, and Bobrov made 9 attacks. The group of young leading Lieutenant A. Rudnev, who later became a hero of the Soviet Union, also acted skillfully. The attacking aircrafts inflicted great losses to Hitlerites. In the evening, the command of the ground troops sent the pilots gratitude for the apt blows on the enemy from the air. All of us rejoiced at the success of our youth. Having made 10-15 combat sorties, crew commanders became fluent in the ground and air situation. The most distinguished were awarded the Order of the Red Banner. M.P. Garashansky soon became the leader of the group. Savvy and courageous, he always returned from the mission without loss and enjoyed the respect of all in the regiment. The same short, skinny officer Fektistov, who was ready to fly into battle, for a short time received several awards. Even Gorbenko, characterized by his judgment, accuracy in hitting targets, was also awarded many orders. After the war, he graduated with honors from the academy named after N.D. Zhukovsky, and now with the rank of colonel engineer continues to serve in the Air Force. Many years later, after the victory over the enemy, I had a chance to meet Boris Vasanin and Gennady Krasovin. In a friendly conversation, we recalled hard front days. "I will never forget my first combat flight," he said. Vasanin. "I was ordered to keep strictly in line behind the leader and do everything on his command. But here we crossed the front line, under the wing, a cluster of German cars and other equipment. In the excitement, I forgot about the instructions of senior comrades and without any command threw the plane into the attack. I was avenging the enemy for the death of my relatives and people close to me. Having used up all the ammunition, I moved away from the object of the attack and I didn't see a single one of my planes. I broke through the bursts of enemy shells and took a course to the east. He landed at the airfield where Po-2s were based. Having refueled the machine, I flew to my regiment. Of course, they scolded me for my unauthorized actions, but forgave me. I was young, not restrained, and Boris Vasanin also told about one episode. It was west of Königsberg, almost at the end of the war. A group of stormtroopers, which included Vasanin, attacked German ships. Enemy anti-aircraft guns were hitting the islas from both banks of the canal. But now the fire stopped, and on Boris's plane rushed several Focke-Wulfs. Fight with them was useless. Therefore Vassanin steeply planned, and brought the car almost at the water. He managed to break through to his airfield. True, his plane was all in the holes. Natsaiv, not a car. Eh? Said the technicians. Gennady Krasovin joined the conversation. We were young and hot. Sometimes we risked ourselves unnecessarily. I was called unlucky in the regiment. 7 times I was shot down, 7 times I left the burning airplane. And if I had acted more coolly, more calculatingly, 4 of these cases might not have happened. Arifiev was right to reprimand me at that time. Yes, pilots sometimes made mistakes. But in a tense combat situation, when events develop very quickly and often unexpectedly, not everyone can instantly orient himself. Apparently, sometimes Gennady Krasovin's delayed reaction was also affected. Nevertheless, he made 146 combat sorties, was considered, like Boris Vassanin, one of the best pilots of the division. We received an order to attack a fascist column of tanks near Daubevbios. Armoured vehicles were moving towards our troops. It was necessary to block the way of the steel avalanche, to strike it on the approach to the front line. The squadron of Hero of the Soviet Union Fyodor Sadchikov was the first to take off from the Kobalniki airfield. Taking off, the airplanes left thick plumes of dust behind them. Having gathered in a group, the attack planes went along the specified road at an altitude of 500 meters. Soon the leader noticed a column of tanks. Attack, ordered the commander, and formidable machines, one after another, rushed at the enemy. Hundreds of anti-tank bombs fell from the airplane hatches. A few cars with ugly swastikas on their sides went up in flames. The squadron repeated the approach, bombarding the column with rocket shells and aimed gun bursts. This time, the enemy opened fire on the attack aircraft from all anti-aircraft weapons. Make a third run, ordered the leader of the group. Each pair selects a target individually. Zvigayev and K. Sharavin noticed that in the head of the column accumulated several cars. Tanker trucks and tanks squeezed between them. The pilots aimed at them, and suddenly Gulyayev heard on the radio the anxious voice of a friend. "Goodbye, guys. For the motherland." Vladimir threw a glance at the wingman's car. Enveloped in flames, it was approaching the ground. Without ceasing to shoot, Konstantin directed his attack aircraft in the thick of the fascist equipment. A gigantic fire cloud rose up. Fuel tanks were bursting, cars and tanks were burning. Konstantin Shuravin repeated the immortal feat performed by 4 pilots of our division: Alexander Novikov, Anatoly Blinov, Ivan Orlenko, and Alexander Malov. Long blazed a huge fire lit by the Hero. Later, when we fought in the area of Koenigsberg, one of the artists reproduced the feat of Konstantin Shuravin on the wall of the building where our club was located. I do not know whether this panel has survived, but Kostya Shuravin remained in our memory forever. Vladimir Gulyayev experienced the death of his friend the hardest. He avenged him mercilessly on the enemy. I and now, many years after the war, often meet with the former attack pilot. In free time from rehearsal and filming, he comes to me, and we spend a long time looking at old photos, red letters of fellow soldiers, then go for a wander through the streets of the capital. Once Volodya suggested walking along Gorky Street. Slowly walking through the night Moscow, we reached the Alexander Garden. At the Kremlin wall, on the tomb of the unknown soldier, the eternal torch was burning, symbolizing the immortality of the heroes who fell for the freedom and independence of our motherland. "This is the memory of our pilot, Sergei Sergeyevich," said Vladimir quietly, as if afraid to disturb the eternal sleep of those who did not return from the war to their families. "Yes, and about them. Many battle companions died in desperate fights with the cruel enemy. Once Igor Posokov's crew did not return from a mission. His airplane was found only in 1965. For a long time we searched for the place of death of the crews of Lieutenants Lukanin and Tarokin. A chance helped. The 6th Moscow Guards Air Assault Regiment flew from the field site near the village of Pankovo to the airfield near the village of Sochki. The pilot hero of the Soviet Union, Dmitry Tarasov, and the senior technician of the squadron, Postnikov, found the wreckage of Il-2 not far from the airfield. According to the numbers on the engine and units, they found out that this machine belonged to Lieutenant Tarokin. To find out what happened to the lieutenant and his partner Lukanin, we went to the locals. They told us that 2 attack planes bombed the road filled with Hitlerites. Many German soldiers were killed here. Said a grey-bearded peasant from the village of Suchki. Your pilots fought heroically, but there were very few of them. First one plane was shot down, then another pilot landed his car in the woods. He was surrounded by German machine gunners. The shooting went on there for a long time. The Nazis wanted to take the pilot alive, but he wouldn't let them. Heavily wounded, they brought him to the village, put him near the barn and shot him in front of all the inhabitants. For 3 days, the monsters did not allow the body to be buried. On the 4th night, the old man and his grandson snuck into the barn. They put the body in a prefabricated coffin and buried it. The grave was covered with sod. We were shown where the ashes of the hero guardsman rested. We established that it was Lieutenant V. Tarokin and reburied him. The guard's banner of the regiment was brought to the grave. The pilots swore to crush the enemy until complete victory over Nazi Germany. The guardsmen kept their oath. They glorified the 335th Assault Division with new combat feats. One for all and all for one became the law of the collective. Here is a vivid example of camaraderie in battle. A group of attack aircraft, having completed a combat mission, returned to their airfield. Noticing that one of the planes had fallen behind the formation and started to turn sideways, the leader ordered Nikolai Milishechkin to help the crew commander to regain orientation and bring him home. Milishechkin increased engine speed and caught up with the errant airplane. He stepped forward and signals, "Follow me." At that time, the enemy anti-aircraft artillery hit the attack aircraft. Striganov and 3 other comrades in arms rushed to the rescue of their comrades. Although the fuel in the tanks of the Ilov was left for a few minutes of flight, they attacked the anti-aircraft battery, silenced it. When the group landed, Captain F. Sajkov found out the reason for the loss of orientation of one of his subordinates. It turned out that on the car, lost pilot shattered the glass compass shell shrapnel. The squadron commander announced gratitude to Nikolai Milishechkin, who helped his comrade in arms to avoid trouble. The pilot VV Striganov, who came to the rescue of the 2 crews, was also rewarded. Ahead of the events, I want to say a few more words about Nikolai Milishechkin. He made 114 combat sorties and was presented to the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. But on the day of the 28th anniversary of the Great October Revolution, the pilot did not return from a combat mission. Later it turned out that Nikolai, having used up all the ammunition, met a group of German fighters. No matter how the pilot maneuvered, but his car was shot down, and he himself, burned and wounded, was taken prisoner. In January 1945, Milishechkin, together with a group of French patriots, escaped from Hitlerites. In Milashkikin's crew air gunner was Petty Officer Zaindovich. Once at the end of the battle, an anti-aircraft shell penetrated the cockpit and tore off his leg. The gunner found the courage to report to the command. "Everything's all right. I'm temporarily cutting off communication." With the cord from the helmet phone, he pulled his thigh so that he would not bleed out before landing. And the next day, a Po-2 airplane took Zidanovich to the hospital. Saying goodbye to us, he said, "No friends, fate separates us, but my heart and soul are with you." Unfortunately, I do not know where Zidanovich is now. Before the war, he served in the police in Moscow. One of the best snipers in the division was considered an air gunner, Ivan Alexandrov. He saved the life of the crew commander 3 times, destroyed 3 enemy fighters, for which he was awarded the Order of Glory. The last flight he made with the squadron commissar Vladimir Isham. They arrived to us on the same day. Ivan from the infantry, Vladimir from the Reserve Aviation Regiment, a Muscovite, and Alexandrov, a worker from Ivanovo, became friends. And the commander of the unit, hero of the Soviet Union, Vasily Gavrilovich Bolotov, enrolled them in the same crew. It should be said that V.G. Bolotov, his staff and his deputy in the political part, Lieutenant Colonel M.P.I. Duranin, constantly did a lot of work to foster friendship and camaraderie among the troops. In this, they saw one of the main reasons for the combat successes of fellow soldiers. Vasily Gavrilovich, as no one else, was able to notice the individual characteristics of aviators, to understand the common interests that brought soldiers together. According to this principle, he completed crews, squads, and squadrons. Telling me about Isham and Alexandrov, Bolotov recalled such a case. Once, as part of a squadron commanded by hero of the Soviet Union Major Makarov, flew on a mission, and the crew of Vladimir Isham. In the target area of the attack aircraft were attacked by 32 German fighters. The preponderance was clearly on the side of the Nazis. Makarov's group of 8 planes was accompanied by only 4 of our Yak. The enemy imposed a heavy air battle. 3 ELAs in the first minutes were badly damaged and went to a forced landing. Heroism's attack aircraft also found themselves in a difficult situation. During one of the attacks, a German fighter managed to go ELA in the tail. Ivan Alexandrov was wounded, but he continued to fire, reflecting the attack of enemy fighters. One of the fuckers behaved particularly insolent. At high speed, he began to approach. Left roll, Alexandrov prompted the pilot to bore a little more. Vladimir heard the air gunner's machine gun thudded, and a few seconds later, to the left of the attack aircraft swept through the enemy fighter, engulfed in flames. "No, thank you, friend. May I thank the gunner, the crew commander?" Alexandrov's wound was so serious that he had to be immediately sent to the hospital. Ivan returned to his home regiment in the midst of the battles for the liberation of the Soviet Baltic. "It didn't get better. Did you run away?" Bolotov asked him sternly. "Not quite so, Comrade Lieutenant Colonel," Alexandrov replied embarrassedly. "I was about to be discharged anyway. I was afraid that they would send me to another unit, so I decided." "You made the right decision. Well done." Vasily Gavrilovich praised him. Tim and Alexandrov again began to fly in the same crew. They were tasked to make an aerial reconnaissance and photograph the airfield occupied by the Nazis near Berezhai. The attack aircraft was crossing the front line from west to east when enemy anti-aircraft guns opened fire on it. A strong impact shook the machine. The pilot tried the controls, everything was in order. Then on the airplane intercom he tried to call the gunner, but Alexandrov was silent. Vladimir Izam thought that his comrade is wounded. Just before the airfield in the cockpit began to penetrate the acrid smoke, it accumulated more and more. There was nothing to breathe, and the ground was barely visible. Vladimir landed the plane almost at random. We saw how Izam's attack plane landing almost crashed into the forest. The pilot jumped out of the plane and tried to open the lantern of the gunner's cockpit. Technicians arrived. They quickly opened the lantern with a crowbar, but Ivan Alexandrov no longer needed help. He was lying in smouldering overalls. His hand was frozen on the handle of the machine gun. The brave Komsomol member was buried with all military honors. For the death of Ivan Alexandrov, the enemy paid cruelly. In the battles for Baltic till the end of 1944, air gunners, together with pilots of the division, destroyed 57 fascist planes. The Panevezhskaya operation was over. The troops of the First Baltic Front defeated the resistance nodes on the approaches to the city, eliminated the SS units, and on July 22 completely captured Panevzes, a major communications hub and an important stronghold of the Nazi defense, covering the main routes from the Baltic to East Prussia. For exemplary fulfillment of the command's tasks, in these battles our division was awarded the Order of the Red Banner by the decree of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR. In anticipation of a major Soviet offensive on Riga, Hitlerites significantly strengthened their grouping. Forests, swampy marshes, high-water rivers in combination with deeply echeloned and well-prepared in terms of engineering borders turned the city of Riga into a powerful defensive area. Considering the difficult conditions in which the offensive was to take place, and not wishing to suffer heavy losses, the Supreme Command decided to shift the main blow from the Riga direction to the Siaulier and Memel direction. 3 armoured armies, 1 tank army, several separate corps and divisions were transferred to the area of Siaulier. In a short period of time, the troops made a march of up to 240 kilometers. Regrouping of units and formations was done secretly. The enemy never figured out our plan. In their intelligence reports, the fascists continued to report that the Soviet troops remained in defense. Their delusion was to our advantage. Nations at war not only fight, not only perform feats. They also celebrate holidays. Day of the Air Fleet in August 1944, we met solemnly. Pilots, technicians, mechanics, other specialists of Moscow, Vitebsk and Polotsk regiments of our order-bearing division received a lot of letters, parcels, and girls presented flowers to the soldiers. I do not remember more dear to my heart bouquets. For more than 3 years of fighting, I seemed to see pilots without overalls for the first time. Orders and medals glistened on their uniforms. Sun and wind-scorched faces of aviators shone with joy. How they now were not like those stern and concentrated pilots whom I saw before combat sorties. In all units held meetings of personnel. People remembered the past battles, proudly called the names of glorious fellow soldiers. talked about what each of them can and must do for the final defeat of Nazi Germany. Everyone understood. Nothing could save the brigand state from catastrophe, but the remaining part of the road to complete victory was not easy and required the maximum tension of forces. Especially solemn was the meeting in the 6th Moscow Guards Regiment. The commander of the unit, Lieutenant Colonel K.P. Zaklepel, read out a letter from fellow countrymen to hero of the Soviet Union Ivan Fomich Pavlov. The workers of Kustaine wrote about what a rich harvest they are gathering. The collective farm Red Defense of Kustaine district, where Pavlov was born, achieved great success in harvesting. Here mobilized all internal reserves, reported in the letter. To mow bread with sickles and size 84 collective farmers and collective farmers came out. The 70-year-old old man Gavriel Vivanov, daily mows with a scythe 30-40 hundredths of a hectare, grandfather Pavel Sacha, half a hectare a day. Even Fomich Pavlov will not have to blush for his fellow countrymen. These lines smelled of native fields and forests. It was as if we had been home. It became brighter on the soul. I wanted to return home sooner, but the road there led through the war. The Guard sent a reply to Kazakhstan. As always, courageously and fearlessly fights with enemies your fellow countryman hero of the Soviet Union, Guards Captain Ivan Fomich Pavlov. He set a kind of record. He was the first in the unit to make 200 combat sorties on his attack aircraft. The citizens of Kustaine sent a gift to the Guards. Airplanes, attack planes, built on their savings. These machines were awarded to the best pilots of the link of Officer Smirnov. Some time later, Pavlov wrote to his fellow countrymen back home. Today we can report that the pilots of the link of Anatoly Smirnov on your airplanes have already made 50 combat sorties. Attack aircrafts destroyed 8 tanks, 32 vehicles, killed up to 300 fascist soldiers and officers, suppressed the fire of 6 artillery and mortar batteries. In air battles shot down 3 Focke-Wulf 190. Out of modesty, Ivan Fomich did not write what heavy battle he himself had recently endured. The group consisted of 7 crews. Going to the target, which was 8 kilometers east of the city of Bauska, attack aircraft at an altitude of 800 meters were attacked by 18 German fighters. The first group of Fokkers came in from the top right, the second from below the rear, and the third from the right at a 4-quarter angle. Captain Pavlov instantly assessed the situation, chose the most advantageous maneuver. Our planes stood in a circle and spiraled down to the ground to prevent the Hitlerites from attacking from below to hit the most vulnerable place of Ilov. The tactical method was successful. The attack did not bring success to the enemy. Moreover, he missed one airplane, which was shot down by an air gunner of Pavlov's crew, Guard Senior Sergeant Mamirin. The second group of German fighters came in from below to seize space at low altitude and disrupt the tactical plan of the attackers. But the enemy was too late. Thanks to a vigorous maneuver, our planes dropped so low that the Focke-Wulfs should no longer attack from below, otherwise they would crash into the ground. Having abandoned their plan, the Nazis began to surface in 40-50 meters from the Ilyushinai. At atomic IFF, Pavlov set fire to one more Vulture, and Senior Lieutenant Shakov and his air gunner Senior Sergeant Vanin shot down each of them a Focke-Wulf 190. The tactics chosen by our pilots quite justified themselves. Descending, the attack aircraft were pulling the enemy deep into our territory. Each crew knew its task. Some reflected the attack of F-1090 from above, others from below. After the first unsuccessful attack, the enemy fighters regrouped and again rushed at Pavlov's group. But the enemy was met by dense fire from cannons, machine guns and rockets. 4-fold numerical superiority did not help the Nazis, despite the fact that the Il-2 was much heavier than the Focke-Wulf and did not have the same maneuverability. The decisive role in achieving this success played a high training of Soviet pilots, their sense of elbow in battle, firepower and good defense-winged tanks. Annoyed by unsuccessful attacks and the loss of 4 airplanes, the Nazis threw themselves at the attackers from different sides, and Ilyushin defending all pulled to their airfield. There was a lot of damage on the machines. However, no one from the Pavlov group not only did not die, but was not even wounded. Turning to the airfield, the commander of the regiment, Lieutenant Colonel Zaklepel, who also went on a mission as part of the Brave 7, reported to me that the pilots and air gunners fought selflessly. I bow before the art of Captain Pavlov to lead the battle, he said in conclusion. The political department of the division organized in the unit's conversations, issue of wall newspapers, combat leaflets, bulletins and leaflets lightning, dedicated to the air battle of the group of twice hero of the Soviet Union I, Chef Pavlov with 32 German fighters. In one of the wall newspapers I read a short note Junior Lieutenant V. Karpetskov. It ended with the words, "To the folly of the brave we sing a song." I knew well this young blonde-haired pilot, a native of the village of Borisovo, Gorky region. Small in stature, handsome and chiseled, Vasily Karpetskov was one of the first among the newcomers of the squadron of Mironov received, and perfectly mastered the combat aircraft. When I checked his knowledge and flying skills, I had the impression that Vasily is not yesterday's graduate of the school, but a mature airfighter. In everyday life, he was as if shy to show his superiority and knowledge and abilities in front of his peers. But in the air, he literally transformed. Soon about the young attack pilot Vasily Karpetskova talked about the entire regiment. In the most difficult situation, the pilot was able to find batteries and airfields of the enemy to bomb and shoot accurately. Shmi's abilities, or rather the gift of an airfighter, especially came in handy for him when the division was operating in the Baltics. We continuously attacked the enemy, destroyed his tanks, shot artillery, mortar batteries and infantry. Karpetskov in these heavy battles showed himself a real hero. He was awarded the Order of the Red Banner, accepted as a member of the party. About such people they say that they are from a special material. As part of the group, which drove Captain Mironov, Vasily always distinguished himself. In one of the flights he attacked the target 4 times, set fire to 2 tanks, destroyed an anti-aircraft battery of the enemy. But at the moment of leaving the dive, the junior lieutenant's plane was damaged. The commander ordered Karpetskov to go to his airfield accompanied by cover fighters. Already at the beginning of the return route, several Messerschmitt 109s pounced on Karpetskov's plane. The German pilots counted on easy pry. The attack aircraft was damaged and it was not difficult to kill it. However, they miscalculated. Yaks, covering Il-2, courageously defended Karpetskov's crew, and Vasily and his gunner radiator skillfully fought back the enemy. But now the attack aircraft ran out of ammunition, and fascist fighters, having restrained the actions of Yakovlevs, attacked the E-Isle, disabling the radio station and landing organs. The landing gear, torn out by the explosion, dangled helplessly under. And yet, under the cover of comrades, Karpetskov flew to his airfield. Unable to land on the narrow, limited on 3 sides of the forest runway and contact by radio with the command post, the pilot wrote a note, put it in a helmet which tightly tied and, flying over the control center, dropped as improvised pennant was brought to me. On an unevenly torn off a piece of paper, written in large letters, Vasily report. I cannot land on the airfield. The car will collapse, and I'll block the runway and disrupt the combat missions of my comrades. I'm landing on the highway. Before everyone's eyes, the junior lieutenant turned the attack aircraft, which was barely holding in the air, and led it to land. At contact with the ground, the landing gear fell off and the plane landed on the fuselage. On the same day, Vasily Karpetskov on another Il-2 made 2 more combat sorties. In the evening, I presented the brave communist pilot with the Order of Glory. And a few days later, in one of the fierce air battles, junior lieutenant Vasily Karpetskov fell to the death of the brave. In the 20th days of August 1944, our troops, successfully advanced with battles to the seaside southwest of Riga. They were separating a powerful German grouping to save themselves from defeat. Hitlerites concentrated in the area of Siauliai considerable forces, including a large number of tanks, aimed at the flank of our troops. The enemy aviation sharply intensified its actions. In such a difficult situation, the 335th Air Assault Division, together with other units, was to disrupt the enemy offensive near Siauliai. A squadron of attack aircraft took to the air. The first 4 were led by Deputy Squadron Commander V. Sologub, the second N. Platonov. They were accompanied by 8 Lay-5s. Even before they approached to the Hitlerite defense line, the pilots noticed a group of U-87s just ahead and to the right of themselves. They were under cover of fighters FB-190. The Elysian leader decided to attack the bombers on a counter-course. BV Sologub informed the fighters of the cover by radio. Lavochkin had to cut off the Fokkers from the bombers. At the command of VWs, Sologub both 4 Il-2s turned to the enemy, lined up along the front and went to gain altitude. They were approaching very quickly. Some of our fighters had already engaged in an air battle with the enemy. When the attack aircraft came to the same altitude as the junkers, the distance between them was about 2,500 meters. 9 Ju-87s were in a tight formation. V. Sologub radioed that without his command the crews did not open fire. When the bombers were 500-800 meters away, fire. Each of our 8 crews simultaneously hit from 2 guns and 2 machine guns. The Germans began to get nervous. The formation of their planes broke. One bomber, flying in the middle, tilted and smoked. The remaining junkers, deprived of the support of their fighters, shot off indiscriminately. Their shells did not reach the target, and the attack aircraft continued to approach the enemy. Fire, fire, repeated the commander of the Ilov group. 2 more U-87s caught fire. The line of Hitler's planes finally disintegrated. They were dropping bombs aimlessly wherever they could. In the meantime, our cover fighters shot down 3 Fe-190s and set fire to 1 bomber, having lost 7 planes. The enemy turned back. Selese's assault aircraft, having reorganized, took a course to the main target, a cluster of tanks. On the approach to Sauli, Solog saw how armored cars crawled out of hiding on the road. Hitlerites did not expect the raid and quietly turned into a marching column. This is where the Ilyushins came upon them. The group of V. Sologub's group hit the lead car, and N.P. Platonov up trailing one. From the first attack, pilots managed to ignite 3 tanks, and on the next run, Nikolai Silkin destroyed the 4th machine. Assault aircraft attacked the target 3 more times. In total, they shot down 7 Hitler's vehicles. V. Sologub's 8-man crew was returning to their airfield. Towards them flew a group of heroes of the Soviet Union N, Makarov and F. Sadchikova, who were to finish the enemy column. It was with 20-year-old squadron commander Fyodor Ilyich Sadchikov. I got acquainted at the time when our division was fighting with the slippers of the enemy, tearing from Tilsit to Shawiya in Mitaiva, landing at Barinachai airfield, where the regiment of Hero of the Soviet Union Lieutenant Colonel V.V.G. Bolotov was based. I saw a group of pilots on the edge of the forest. Gathered at one of the airplanes, they listened attentively to a short captain with a tablet in his hand. He was giving the last instructions before the flight. Noticing me, the officer reported that his squadron in 15 minutes goes into battle. Fyodor Sadchikov fixed his black hair and smiled with his brown eyes, over which rose thick eyebrows. We are fellow countrymen, Comrade Colonel, Voronezh citizens. In my memory, I remembered the pictures of tense everyday life at the airfield near Voronezh. I remembered my first combat sortie on IL-2, Karpov's machine, riddled with bullets and shell splinters, who had flown at Orel. For lack of time to talk in detail with Fyodor Sadchikov failed. "We have to go, Comrade Colonel," said the captain. "Permission?" "So long." 10 attack aircraft cut down on the start and one by one rose into the sky. A few minutes later, in the starting radio receiver, heard Sadchikova's voice. "Attention, on the left, 5 kilometers away, a column of enemy tanks." During this sortie, the squadron commander and pilots Guliev and Platonov destroyed 1 enemy tank each. The regiment made a total of 100 assaults during the day, causing the enemy much damage to manpower and equipment. In the evening, together with the regiment commander, I again came to the squadron F.I. Sadchikova. "Well, hero, what will please you? How did your eagles fight?" The captain gave me a decrypted film, and I clearly saw on it 21 burning enemy tanks, 12 broken artillery pieces, 5 large fires, eyes. Then the captain reported that for 6 sorties, the squadron dropped 14,000, 160 anti-tank and 128 high-explosive bombs, fired 472 rockets at the enemy, expended 180,000 23mm cannon shells and 898,500 rounds of ammunition, conducted 2 air battles, during which the gunners shot down 1 Fe-190. At night, we received a telegram. The commander of the front troops, Army General I.X. Bagramayan, thanked the aviators for their excellent actions against enemy tanks. Among the soldiers of the Red Army, who took part in the liberation of the Soviet Baltic, there were many officers, sergeants and soldiers of local nationalities, Latvians, Estonians, Lithuanians. They fiercely fought with the enemy, spared neither blood nor life, liberating their native places from the power of the hated invaders. The inhabitants of towns and villages, old men, women and children, joyfully met their liberators. Many of them fought with Hitlerites as partisans, helped us in every way they could. In this connection, I would like to tell about one of the patriots, Alexander Yukumovich, Junior Lieutenant Victor Rybianets, performed a combat mission in the Riga-Libava area. His attack aircraft came under fire of enemy anti-aircraft artillery. The machine caught fire. The pilot had no time to jump out with a parachute. The altitude was too low. Rybianets decided to land the plane in a small clearing behind the forest. He landed. Hitlerites detected the place of landing and organized a raid. Victor heard the barking of dogs. Close machine gun bursts. He remembered that during the landing he saw a farm nearby and ran to the nearest house. An old Latvian man was standing behind the palisade fence. He silently pointed the pilot to a wooden hatch near the bar. Rybianets took refuge in the cellar and sat there until late at night. Then the owner came for the pilot and invited him to dinner. They got acquainted, discussed the situation. "You will be here until our men come," said Alexander Yukumovich. "Don't be afraid, everything will be all right." 22 days AY. Rund hid the Soviet pilot. Hitlerites came to the farm 3 times. They threatened the old man that if they found a Bolshevik here, they would shoot both of them. Rund proved to them that nobody lives here except a foolish laborer. The Germans believed him and did not visit for a long time. The last time they came was when there was neither farmer nor laborer on the farm. Alexander Yukumovich led Rybianets through the front line by secret paths. No one was expecting Victor's return. They thought he was dead. We sent airplanes to search for him. Nikolai Osipov was the last to search. "Shaved the entire forest, Comrade Colonel," he reported to me, but Rybianets did not find. In the list against the surname of Viktor Rybianets, there was a record, missing in action. That day his friend Nikolai Miloshechkin wrote in his diary, "We didn't have time to paint a picture of him." The pilot was referring to the assault on a tank column near the town of Sioliai. "I was in charge of this flight and heard the air gunner Chernomorov reporting from the ground. Humpbacks. The air is calm. Make one more approach." 4, led by Miloshechkin, again went on the attack. One of the Tigers bristled with machine gun fire. Its turret flashed brightly. At that moment, a wide streak of sparks separated from Vitya Rybianets' Sturmovik. The fired rocket shell pierced through the Krupp armor, and the tank went up in flames. Yes, Viktor Rybianets was a brave pilot, and suddenly to lose such a fighter. It was a cloudy September day. After the inspection of the equipment division, engineer Titov and I were going to fly to the airfield of another regiment. We went to the airplane. Quite unexpectedly, a slender, thin man appeared in front of me. "Martin Junior Lieutenant Rybianets," he had said. I embraced Victor like a native son. He told me about Alexander Yukumovich Runda, about the fact that all Latvian people were waiting impatiently for their liberation. And our armies were in a hurry, knocking Hitlerites out of towns and villages, cleansing the land of Baltic from the filth of fascism. The enemy persisted, resisted fiercely, and in some parts of the front concentrated quite strong groups and went on a counter-offensive. The battles, as a rule, were fierce. The main efforts of the troops of the First Baltic Front were directed on mastering the city of Jelgava, a major communications hub connecting the Baltic with East Prussia. Hitlerites concentrated here large forces. They counted on a long defense. In the area of Jelgava pulled a lot of aviation, especially fighter aviation. In this connection, regiments of the 335th Air Assault Division were relocated to the forward airfields. 6th Guards in Povatici, 683rd, near Sioliai, 826th, in a forest clearing near Benorishe. Having gathered regimental commanders K.P. Zaklipa, V.G. Bolotov, V.N.V. Bakov and their deputies on political part, the staff of the unit and the political department familiarized them with the situation on our section of the front, explained the upcoming combat tasks. Ensuring the success of the offensive operation depended largely on the tactically competent development of assault strikes, on the comprehensive training of flight and technical staff, its ideological level discipline. Needless to say, during that period some aviators began to overestimate their combat experience and military skill, reduced the demanding attitude to themselves, weakened vigilance. All the same, they said, under any conditions, the enemy will not resist the power of Soviet weapons, and its defeat is inevitable. We waged a decisive struggle against such a complacent mood. As an example showing the cunning and guile of the enemy, we cited the case of the death of the deputy commander of the squadron, Senior Lieutenant Sologub. In the area of Prekul, the enemy, seeking to expand the bridgehead, threw several dozen tanks into the attack. They were supported by artillery. Attack aircrafts rushed to the aid of our ground units. Senior Lieutenant V. Sologub led the first 6. When approaching the target, the pilots saw well how the shells were bursting in the location of our infantry. For the motherland, shouted Solog, and 6 Fluv bombarded the enemy. 2 tanks burst into flames like matchboxes. Encouraged by the success, Sologab and his wingmen made a second run and suppressed the artillery fire. The attacks were repeated again and again. Many pilots, including the group commander, ran out of ammunition, and suddenly 12 German fighters came out of the clouds. Only the radio gunners could fight them. They still had ammunition in their belts. However, the battle had to be fought in far from equal and not favourable conditions for the attackers. The Nazis had both numerical and fire superiority. In addition, the crew of Solo Bear Gunner was not proactive enough. As a result, the attack aircraft returned to their airfield without a group commander. The head of the political department, Colonel I. T. Kalugin, offered me to fly with him to the regiment where Vladimir Sologub served and hold a meeting of party and Komsomol activists. People are painfully experiencing the death of Solog, said Ivan Trofimovich. It is necessary to inspire them to raise their spirits to aim at solving new difficult combat tasks. At the meeting was a frank conversation. Pilots realize that you cannot be complacent, lose self-control. In the excitement of the assault to spend all the ammunition, do not leave a reserve in case of an unexpected meeting with the air enemy. After the meeting, Ivan Trofimovich Kalugin and I decided to inspect the dugouts where the pilots and technicians lived. We had to go through the whole airfield. Near the empty gunnery, where Vladimir Sologub's airplane used to stand, the girls among them was Rita, Vladimir's school friend. The girl graduated from the School of Junior Aviation Specialists and came to our division. Rita felt the loss of her friend hard. Her face was crying. Sergeant Neproyakina, a radio operator, consoled. Do not cry, be strong, Rita. What is the use of tears? Comrades will avenge Volodya on the damned fascists. They will, Rita. And today Bevan Trofimovich entered the conversation and showed his hand in the direction of the attack aircraft of Captain N. Makarov leaving for another combat mission. Colonel Kalugin was not only respected, but also loved by all our aviators as a son. He was able to talk to people, well understood their mood, sensitive to the needs and requests of officers and soldiers, was always fair and caring. I remember a case when I was informed that Pilot SS did not fly on a combat mission for no particular reason. Sergei Sergeyevich let me handle it myself, Ivan Trofimovich asked. This is a serious matter, no matter how someone did not overreact, did not cast a shadow of suspicion on the officer. Kalugin immediately flew to the regiment, searched for Pilot ES, and asked him, "Why did you return to the airfield?" "The landing gear wouldn't retract, Comrade Colonel, and it's forbidden to fly with the released one." The chief of the political department ordered the technicians to lift the machine on the gantry and check the mechanism of landing gear retraction and release. No defect was found. "Try to take off again," he advised Kalugin Officer C. He took off, but the landing gear did not retract again, and then the colonel himself sat in the cockpit and took off into the air. To the surprise of all who were present at the airfield, the shields of amortization, struts tightly stuck to the center plane Alyushin. Was Pilot S wrong? No, it's not that. He was simply tired in the process of intense combat work, and he did not have enough strength to move the landing gear retraction and release crane into position. We gave a command to the medical service to examine the health of all pilots of the division and initiated a petition to the Air Army to organize a short-term frontline rest home. Our request was granted at basis, and some other crew commanders were sent to rest. A week and a half later, the officer returned to the regiment and together with his combat friends continued to crush the Nazis. It should be noted that in our division, there were no commanders who would underestimate the importance of party political work. On the contrary, often the officers in charge reported to the political department about certain shortcomings in the activities of party and Komsomol organizations, and, as a rule, asked for help from Colonel I. Kalugin and workers of his office. Thus, at the signal of the regiment, Commander V.G. Boletov, political department, went to his unit and on the spot identified the problems. It turned out that political work there, in a number of cases, was carried out in isolation from combat tasks. In particular, was poorly put propaganda of best practices of masters of assault strikes, and in one squadron for a relatively long time never discussed at meetings the issue of the vanguard role of communists and Komsomol members. Revealed shortcomings tried to eliminate as soon as possible. At the party work were promoted advanced communist pilots Reichkov, Karpenko. Komsomol activists were replenished with pilots Vasinin, Astakshov, air gunners Bezhivotny, Dubinsky, and from among the best aviators appointed editors of combat leaflets and agitators. Political department of the division organized training of young activists. Seminars were held with them regularly, twice a month, on the most topical issues of aviators' combat life, agitation, propaganda, and mass political work. Thus, Lieutenant Colonel Okshuzov, giving a lecture planning of party and Komsomol work, gave the task to each listener to make plans. Then there was a lively discussion of them. Such seminars were very useful, contributed to the revitalization of all party political work in specific combat conditions. There is no need to list all the activities carried out by the political department to foster high moral and combat qualities in the personnel. I want to note only those that have become traditional in the division. It was customary to honor pilots and air gunners who made the 100th and 200th combat sorties. This event turned into a holiday. A solemn meeting was prepared for the crew leaving for the Jubilee flight. Flowers were given to the jubilarian. Congratulations were written to him. Special lightning sheets were dedicated to him. I especially remember the solemn meeting of Captain Boris Padolko when he was returning from his 100th combat mission. Regimental Commissar V. Kotyarevsky brought a slogan to the parking lot. Hot combat greetings to the brave attack pilot Captain Padalko, who made the 100th combat sortie. The girls picked bouquets of wildflowers. I hear the attack aircraft approached the parking lot. The pilot and the gunner radiator came out of the cockpit. They were literally covered with flowers. Under the loud hooray, friends lifted in their arms and carried the birthday boys to the improvised tribune. I wish my friend Captain Boris Padolko to live as many years as he has flown combat missions, said Captainess Kovalchik. Many kind, warm words were said to the combat commander and his gunner. Boris Padolko heartily thanked his comrades and urged them to beat the invaders until complete victory. Honoring those who distinguished themselves in the battle-inspired spirit gave birth to a desire to deserve the same honor. This applied not only to pilots and air gunners, but also to technicians, mechanics, aviation specialists, who showed an example of labor courage, spared no effort to ensure that the material part of the division was in constant combat readiness. The technical staff of the Polotsk Assault Regiment noted the hard work, initiative and soldier's ingenuity of the mechanic of the plane subaltern. His machine returned from a combat mission badly damaged. It was necessary, in particular, to replace the broken plane. At night, the communist subaltern, together with his motorist, snuck to the neutral strip, where the battered sludge was lying, dismantled the plane, then called a truck and brought it to the airfield. With the help of comrades, the mechanic had time to prepare the attack aircraft for another combat flight. That's how the communists all the time showed an example, inspired, led the non-partisans, taught them courage, bravery, fortitude. The propaganda of the combat experience of the advanced crews, and first of all the communists and Komsomol members, was greatly promoted by the army and frontline press. War correspondents were not guests in aviation regiments. They were almost without leave at the airfields, and some of them flew on the mission themselves as air gunners. In one of the issues of the army newspaper was published Captain Padalko's story about an assault flight. The group he led included pilots Andriy Mordvinov, Ospyshev, and Fedorishev. The article was instructive in that it clearly explained the reasons that allowed to make a successful raid on a cluster of enemy vehicles and tanks. Bomb and fire strikes of the ILOF were sudden and rapid. The crews acted tactically competent, taking into account the specific situation. Stealthily approaching the target from the west, the attacking aircraft, at the command of the leader, took turns dive on the column and left for their own territory. Then they gained altitude and attacked the enemy again. The result was recorded on photographic film. A group of Ilyushin destroyed up to 20 vehicles with ammunition, set fire to a tank, caused several fires. The pilot Mordvinov, who had been accepted as a party member on the eve of the flight, acted perfectly. Mastery and endurance showed Junior Lieutenant Fedorishev. Shrapnel anti-aircraft shells on his machine were severely damaged braking system. Despite this, he landed safely at his airfield. Its rental political workers and the political department of the division constantly sang correspondence with party and Komsomol organizations of factories, plants, collective farms, where our aviators once worked or studied, and these letters were often published on the pages of the local press. We had a good connection with the newspaper of the Yaroslavl region Severny Raboshi. This was due to the fact that in the 6th Guards Regiment Fort Yaroslavl pilots Afanasyev, Solovyev, Shaykov, Burov, Detonin, Gurov, brothers Smirnovs, Anatoly and George, aircraft technician Nikolai Vorobyov, who served more than 220 combat sorties, and other specialists. I have one of its numbers in front of me. From the yellowed strip looks young, courageous face of an attack pilot, former Stakhanovets Yaroslavl tire factory captain Sergei Afanasyev. On his account, 170 combat sorties on Il-2 airplane. The famous guard was awarded the diploma of the Central Committee of the Komsomol, 2 orders of the Red Banner, the Order of Alexander Nevsky, the Order of the Patriotic War of the First Degree, and the Order of the Red Star. A lot of winged defenders of the sky, savvy and hard-working people, knowledgeable in aviation technology, gave the motherland the land of Yaroslavl. And when the whole world heard about the unparalleled feat of Valentina Tereshkova, the first woman, the conqueror of space depths, I remembered again and again the Yaroslavl guardsmen who fought the hated enemy as part of the 335th Air Assault Division. Sergei Ivanovich Afanasyev was one of the most courageous in the family of airfighters. He did not live to see the bright victory day over Nazi Germany. He made his last flight on New Year's Eve 1945. Sergei went on a mission in pair with Lieutenant Mushchenkin. Over Saldus, they got into the zone of anti-aircraft fire. One of the shells cut short the life of the wingman. Afanasyev repaid the Hitlerites for the death of his friend by suppressing several guns and destroying their calculations. But the hero himself died a brave death. His machine was shot down during the attack of the 2nd, camouflaged anti-aircraft battery of the enemy. Severny Raboshi and many other newspapers published correspondence, sketches, essays about their heroes' landers. These materials sent to the division were always widely propagandized. We held talks and political briefings on them, organized radio broadcasts and decorated stands.